I believe you can see my slide up on the screen. So today we'll be talking about REST services in InfoPath. I imagine some of you attended the presentation I gave about a month ago on REST, where I gave an overview of what REST is and how to use it in InfoPath. Today we'll be digging a bit deeper into OData in particular and how to use that. For those who don't know, OData is a type of REST service with a specific set of protocols and formats. If you missed the earlier presentation or don't know anything about REST yet, no need to worry, because this should still give you enough information to make use of what I'm giving you. So we'll start off with a presentation for about 10 minutes where I'll describe OData, and followed by a demo in InfoPath using OData to pull in data. So a quick review of OData. It's a REST-based protocol, which means it's basically data that's pulled from a web service, mostly based on the information that's in the URL format. It's been pioneered by Microsoft, but it's an open standard, and it allows for using things like complex filters and lots of sorts of neat things that you're going to see in a moment. The results can be XML in a format that's known as Atom, or JSON, or what's called JSON-Q, which is sort of a stripped-down version of JSON. And there are many services that support OData right now. There's SharePoint's service, which I'll be demoing to you in our demo. There's the Excel REST services. Netflix also has an OData service, and there are a whole bunch of them around now. So as I just mentioned, SharePoint in particular provides a service for retrieving data from the SharePoint's lists and document libraries using OData. So I believe this was first made available in SharePoint 2010, and the service is located at basically the server name. If you want to query a list on a subsite, you'd have the site name, followed by _VTI_bin / listdata.svc. And then after that would come / and then the name of the list you'd be querying. So, for example, if I wanted to query the company's list on the webinar site of my SharePoint site, I would use this URL down here. So OData query strings, and what I mean by that is the URLs, provide a whole lot of options for how you want to retrieve data, what data you want to retrieve, and how you want it sent back. I'll go into a bit more depth with each of these in the coming slides, but as an overview, the top option allows you to retrieve a certain number of records. Skip allows you to skip records. Inline count allows you to tell the service whether or not to tell you how many results it has available for you. Order by allows you to sort the results, and select allows you to pick only certain fields to reduce the payload of what's sent back. And finally, filter, which is perhaps the most important one, allows you to filter data and indicate which rows specifically, which records specifically you want to retrieve. And then when there's more than one query option, which will often happen, they'll be separated by an ampersand, just like in an ordinary URL. So here I'm using the filter is one parameter, top is another, and they're separated by an ampersand. So, OData provides the top, skip, and inline count query options, as I just mentioned, which which actually allow you to do paging with the data. So top, as I mentioned, will allow you to limit the results to just a certain number. So 2 results, 4 results, 10 per page, or whatever. And then skip will allow you to skip the first n rows of data and get whatever comes after that. So let's say I was getting rows of data 10 at a time. First I would leave off the skip, and then for the next page I would have a skip of 10, and then for the next page of that skip value of 20, and so on. It would continue going up by 10. And here's a simple little math formula for figuring out what the skip value should be for any given page of data. Of course, usually if you're using paging, you want to know how many pages there are. So you've got inline count. If you specify inline count with a value of all pages, then it'll include a little field in the XML that's returned that will tell you how many pages, how many records there are. Then you can divide this by the size of the page, or the top option, and that will tell you how many total pages you have. Now, next up is sorting and selecting. So these are pretty straightforward. So if you wanted to have your results in a particular order, say I was querying company records for different companies, and I wanted to arrange them first by state, and then within each state grouping I wanted them arranged alphabetically by title. In that case, I could specify this option, order by equals state, comma, title, and that would give me them in that order. And you can chain this along as far as you want, or include just one field if you wanted to. And then select will limit the fields that are returned. So typically when you query something from OData, it'll just return all the available fields. But sometimes you don't need all of that. And you can speed up your connections and reduce the load on the server by just getting what you want. So if I were querying a list that had title, ID, and state, if I queried it without the select option, it would include the modified date, the created date, the author value. But I don't need all those. I only need the title, and the ID, and the state. So I indicate those in a select option, and just get those. Now, filter is the most involved option, but it's also one of the most useful. So filter can be used to basically filter the results and get only the ones you need, which is always a great thing. It has a rich set of filtering options and allows for very complex queries. And I recommend you checking out these two URLs here at odata.org and Microsoft. The OData one is a bit more concise, so I'd recommend checking that one first. So what does filter allow you to do? Well, first you can filter by value. So let's say I wanted to get only rows where the state was WA, Washington. I could indicate a filter like this, and that would pull those back for me. Up here we can see checking for equality or inequality is specified by these two-letter values. So we have equal to, not equal, greater than, less than, and there would also be greater than or equal to, which would be GE, or less than or equal, which would be LE. So if I wanted to pull back records that only had IDs under 10, I'd have a filter of ID LT10. Well, that's very nice, but what if you wanted to filter on more than one criteria? well, in that case, you can join them together. So we've got and, or, and not for setting up logical conditions. So if I wanted to get records where the state was Washington and the ID was less than 5, I could use this first filter here. If I wanted to get records where a state was Washington or the ID was less than 5, for whatever reason, I could use the second filter. And let's say I wanted to get rows, get none of the rows where a state was Washington or that had an ID under 5. I could set this up here using a not operator, and that would get those for me. On top of that, you can use all kinds of other operators to manipulate the values right on the spot. So OData provides a rich set of math functions. Again, all of them use letters: add, subtract, multiply, divide, and modulo, or remainder. And then some other functions for modifying numbers. We got strings. We can get the length of a string, a part of a string, the substring, replace part of a string, things like that. Or we can check the values of strings with things like substring of, ends with. And we've also got some date manipulation functions. So down here in this example of a filter, if we wanted to get all the records where the state abbreviation started with a W, we could use this. So it's first it's taking the first letter of all the state values, and then finding which ones are equal to W. If we wanted to only get records that were modified before 2010, we'd get the year of the modified value, and then check for those that were less than 2010. Now, one thing to look out for, and that can catch some people up, is the substring of function. As we can see here, most string functions will take the field name first, or the larger string, and then the partial string will be the second parameter. So it starts with state, W. We'll find rows where state starts with W. Ends with state, A. We'll find those where state ends with A. The same goes for index of. So if we wanted to find the index of A in WA, it would be state, A. But for whatever reason, when we're using substring of, the part we're checking for actually goes before the field value. So if you use substring of state, W to check for those that have a W in the state name somewhere, this isn't actually going to work. It'll be W, state. And the Microsoft documentation page I mentioned earlier actually got this particular detail wrong. It says whether the second parameter string value occurs in the first, when it should actually be the other way around. So be careful when you're using substring. Here are a few handy links. There's odata.org, which is the official site of OData. And then this is a page on URI conventions that I mentioned earlier. And here's the, again, the Microsoft page that I mentioned. Okay, so let's go into a demo. Okay, we'll share out my screen. Okay, so here we are in SharePoint, and we can see I've set up a list already with a list of 6 companies. Each has their name here, they've got a phone number and state value. I've also got some products here, and the products are set up to reference the company that they belong to. We've got some prices here and value to indicate whether the product is discontinued or not. So once they're discontinued, you'll have yes. This is actually a Boolean column, which will be important to bear in mind a bit later. Okay, so let's create a new InfoPath form. InfoPath's built-in functionality is available starting with InfoPath 2010. So I will create a new blank 2010 form. And let's call this a purchase order form, for ordering items from a company. So let's set up some fields. I will rename my top field to purchase order. Let's have a company ID and company state. We'll have a product ID and product price. We'll have the quantity products. And let's have a total price for the purchase order, which will be price times quantity. Alright, so first I will set up a data connection to the companies list using the OData list services. So I've already prepared these queries here, but you should be able to see what they do based on what I just described. So here, companies is fairly simple. I've got it selecting just the ID, title, and state fields to get rid of everything else I don't need. And let's add another option here. We'll sort them by title, so that they'll be in alphabetical order. Okay, so I'll copy this over here. So in the company's case, I want to retrieve all the companies at once, so I'm not using a filtered query in this case. I'll just enter the URL here. SharePoint server likes to pop up credential prompt for some reason. Okay, we're all set. I will rename this to companies, and since I'm retrieving everything when the form is loaded, I'll leave this check here. Okay. So I'll create a drop-down box with this company ID field. I'll set this up to populate from that data source. Entry is the repeating group for the rows, so I'll pick that as the entries item. So the value will be the ID property down here. All the field values will be under this properties group under content. So the value will be the ID, and the display value will be the title or the company name. Okay, so that's set up. I'll set up a state field just to display what the company is. So I'll give this the default value formula. So I'll go back to the company's data source and pick the state field this time. And I want to filter it to be the company where the ID matches the currently selected ID, which would be in the main data source here. Okay. So that's set up, and I will add that as a calculated value control. So it'll be read-only. Now I'll add a layout table for the product. Let's make that 3 by 2 actually. Uh, 3 by 2. Okay. So we've got product, price, so before I set these up, I'll add my data connection to the products list. Here again, I've set up my URL in advance. So I've got 2 URLs here. This one is for setting up the data connection. So I'm not going to be filtering when I set up the data connection. I just want to get a sampling of the data so that InfoPath knows what it's going to look like when I pull back real data. So I'm just getting the top 2 records and pulling back the ID, title, and state. Actually, that's not right. It should be ID, title, and price. That should work. So I use that here. And I'll call this products. And since I want to query this on demand when a company is selected and filter only for products within that company, I'm going to uncheck the option to retrieve data when the form is opened. Okay, so now that has been added as well. If we look at this data source, again, we can see that it has these 3 fields: title, price, and ID. So I'll add a drop-down box for the product ID first. Sorry about that. Okay. So this will populate from the product's data source. Entry will be the entries. The value will be the ID. And I want to display the title again. So I'll use title as the display field. So that drop down is set up. For the product price, again, I will use a calculated value box to make it read-only. And I'll set up a default value formula, just like on the state field, to get the price for the currently selected product. So this will be price. Oops. Do that again. Price, and I want to filter to the entry where the ID is equal to currently selected ID. And quantity will be a text box that the user can enter freely. We'll give that a default value of 1. Alright, so we're almost done here. I'll add my total field over here. This also will be a calculated value box. Let's hold this and make it a bit bigger. And this is going to be simply price times quantity. Okay, so the last step here is setting up the query to get just the products for the company that has been selected. So I'm going to add some rules to the company dropdown. First will be an action rule to query products. So I'm going to use the change REST URL action. Here it's got the default set up here. And I will yet again get a pre-prepared URL. So if we have a look at this, we can see that it's filtering based on items that are not discontinued, and where company ID equals a value that's going to be concatenated in. And it's going to, yet again, going to pull back the item ID, title, and price. And here again, let's order by title, so everything's nice and alphabetical. Now, one thing to bear in mind here, let's just put some parentheses around this so that it's clear. Since discontinued is a Boolean column, it's going to treat those values as Boolean values. So if I put quotes around this true here, that's going to cause a data type error, and it'll just give me a 400 error. So it's important to leave off the quotes when you're comparing a Boolean value. The same goes over here. Since ID is an integer, I can't have quotes around it. It'll need to be just a number. That's another gotcha to keep in mind. Okay, so I'll put this in a concat formula, and then I will replace this placeholder with a field in just a moment. I'll insert the company ID, and it looks like we're all set here. So after changing the URL, I need to query the data. So that's querying products, and I just realized I set this to change the company's URL. So I will copy that and change this to products. Now we should be all set. And I'll just add one more action to the product selection, but it's no longer a value when a company has been changed. Okay. All right. So we're all set. So let's give this a whirl. I'll preview the form. Don't need for credentials. All right. So here in this drop-down, we've got the 6 companies sorted alphabetically. So let's have a look at Sprockets Corp. come over here and look at the list, we can see that Sprockets Corp is indeed in California, which is what the form is showing. And Sprockets Corp, being ID 4, should have these 4 items: the 15-inch sprocket, 20-inch sprocket, 36-inch, and the 27-inch sprocket should not be listed because it's discontinued. If we come back here and look at this, we indeed see we have the 15-inch, 20-inch, and 36. So if I pick 20-inch, I'll get the price of $5.20, and I can specify another quantity, which will change the total. Of course, if this were an actual form, I would want to put some nicer formatting on the price field to show it as currency, and of course, same, especially here on total, so that it doesn't have these rounding issues with repeated decimal points. So let's just look at one other company, County Construction. Again, it'll query the products in company 6. Again, I'm not quite sure why it's prompting me for these credentials, but most likely you will not run into this issue. Okay, so County Construction is also in California, which is coming up correctly, and we've got construction-related items here. Discount Emporium is in Washington. So that's pretty much it for this demo. If most likely, if you're putting something together like a purchase order, it would be a bit more complex. I'd imagine usually the products would be a repeating group instead of just a single field. In that case, you'd have 2 options. You might consider querying all the records. If there were a small enough number of them, you would consider querying all the records. Or else you could use a filtered approach and then copy them to a holding location as you queried them on demand, so that the list would grow as it went. Again, copying something like that would require something like Qrules, and I'd recommend looking into that. Okay. So, on to questions. Right. Before I move on to questions, actually, I'd like to return to my slide deck for just a moment. I'd like to, as I mentioned last week, we've also put out a series of videos about REST data connections and REST services on Channel 9. So I definitely recommend checking those out. Hillary's are particularly good. And for those of you who are still using InfoPath 2007 or have users using InfoPath 2007, I'd recommend looking at my blog, which has a way to use Qrules to pull that off even in 2007. Marcy, would you like to say a quick word about training before we move on to questions?
Sure. Let's see. We do have a training class, a master class coming up this month. It's the 24th through the 28th. Actually, that's there's the slide. We also are rolling out a brand new InfoPath intro class, a 101 class, and that will be in October. So if you're interested, just give an email to coursemanager@qdabra.com or visit our website.
Okay. Thank you, Marcy.
No problem.
Okay, so thank you for waiting on your questions. Nancy, I can't say this with 100% certainty without trying it, but what I believe is that the lists service only, it retrieves data from the list itself and not not from a view. So I would say that even if your default view filtered out the discontinued items, most likely you would want to include that in the query. Kevin, also I'm also not sure about this this question you have here. In past times, there were limits on URLs to about 255 characters. I'd imagine that in the case of REST and in these modern times, that limit is probably eased quite a bit, and is probably no longer quite relevant. I guess one way to try this out would be just to use a simple filter. ID is not equal to that's got to be a pretty long URL. Yep, and it looked like that caused an error. I'm not sure if that was because the URL was too long, or it was too long with a number. Let's try title is not equal to, and put this in single quotes. Yeah, so that worked. So I'd imagine there you can probably use a quite long URL without running into any problems, as long as the numbers aren't huge. Okay, back to questions. Yes, Nancy, I did not. That's a very good point. I did not mention the URL for my blog, but it's on InfoPath Dev, which is our site. It's an online forum for InfoPath-based questions. So if you go there and you click blogs, you should be able to find my blog, and that post was one of the relatively more recent ones. Right, I think some of you probably missed what I just shared on my desktop. But basically, to answer Kevin's question, I used this this URL here. Title is not equal to a very long string, and it still returned results. So yeah, so I would say you can use quite long URLs. Also, another question from Kevin: can OData be used to query a Microsoft SQL database? Yes, it can. There are ways to set this up. I don't actually know the details, but if you search for SQL Server and OData, I imagine you will find results relating to that. That'll tell you how to set that up. I'd also recommend looking into our QueryDB service, which is another way to use web services to query data from a database. That's also a very good question. I can't say for certain. We've started to work with REST more and more, learning about it, and looking at what InfoPath can and can't do with REST. But yes, it is very powerful. We have set up solutions in the past that queried information from SharePoint using get-lists-items web service and the OWS server web service. And now that REST and this web service is around, I imagine we'll be using REST a lot more. One very interesting thing we've done with REST is is to use the Excel service, which is another nice service on SharePoint. You can do some nice things with that to actually show charts and graphs within an InfoPath form, which is very neat, I think. I'd be happy to send you information on that if you're interested. Thank you very much for that feedback. Okay, so it's now 8:45. If anyone has any more questions in the next minute or so, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we'll call it a day.